Chapter 1. Jens Timata didn't know yet, but he was about to take his final car ride. It hadn't been a good month, though much of it was his own fault. It was strange how one could constantly strive toward a goal, only to find that once it was achieved, restlessness quickly set in, and the search for new objectives began. At least, that was how he operated. He'd studied hard to earn his degree, fought to land a good job, even moved abroad. Then he'd left that job to start his own business. It had been a huge gamble, but also a path to wealth, and he'd succeeded, obscenely so. Yet even that had lost its appeal, and it had caused problems. When you already had more money than you could ever spend, what was the point in working to make even more? Besides, he wasn't sure what to do with the fortune he already had. He'd moved back home and bought a luxury flat in central Gothenburg, the Tesla he was currently driving, a summer house on the French Riviera, a large motor yacht, and even a private jet. The trouble was that it all bored him. Sure, he liked the flat, but he wasn't particularly fond of the sea. The jet was convenient for travel, but he rarely needed to go anywhere these days. He'd traveled far more while building his company, back when he couldn't afford a private plane. Now he might fly 3 times a year, twice of which were to Collioure on the French coast. He had no family, save for a nephew who brought him both joy and heartache. He'd been in an on-again, off-again relationship with the same woman, Alice, for years. At the moment, it was off, and he'd thought about meeting someone new, but the very idea of dating left him exhausted, and the thought of Tinder, Hinge, or Badoo made him even wearier. His attachment to Alice didn't make things any easier. It felt almost distasteful to be so bored and borderline depressed while living a life most people could only dream of, a life he'd once dreamt of himself. This realization had led him to sit down and do some serious thinking. He probably should have sought professional help, but he hadn't had the energy for that either. Reflecting on his happiest moments, he'd realized he was at his best when chasing something. The moment he achieved his goal, he'd start searching for the next. And he'd been happy as a child, back when he and his brother played sports, read books and comics, and chased girls. That had sparked a newfound interest in an old hobby, a pursuit, a longing that didn't need to have an end. He glanced at the clock. The phone call had surprised him. He hadn't recognized the number, but so few people had his private number that he'd decided to answer anyway. He'd been equally surprised when he realized who it was, and even more by the request for a meeting. The location had been unexpected, too. He'd had to use GPS to find his way deep into the forest. After leaving the motorway, he'd driven down a smaller road past a farm where 2 tractors stood parked outside a large barn. The road became narrower, bumpier, and more winding, and Jens began to regret agreeing to meet out here. He had no desire to scrape the undercarriage of his car on some hidden rock. Still, it wasn't that bad, and in a way he supposed he owed it to the caller. Jens couldn't claim he'd acted entirely fairly, though he hadn't felt he'd had much of a choice at the time. Eventually, the road widened, and there it was, a gray Volvo he didn't recognize, but the driver who stepped out was, of course, familiar. Jens Timata lowered his window and greeted him. "You're late," came the reply. Jens thought the Volvo driver looked nervous and twitchy. "Can you tell me what this is about? Why did you want to meet me here in the forest?" "Get out, and we can talk." Something about the man's demeanor sent a sudden chill racing up Jens's spine, like a spider scuttling across his skin with icy legs. "We can talk here. Just tell me what you want." "It'll be easier if you get out," the man insisted. "Then it'll be easier if you get in," Jens countered. The driver stepped closer. "What are you afraid of?" Jens frowned. "I'm not afraid of anything, but I find this whole situation a bit odd, a bit unsettling, if I'm honest." The man stood just outside the window. "I don't see what the problem is. I just want to show you something." "What?" Step out, and I'll show you. But Jens Timata had had enough. Forget it, he said, starting the car again. Wait, the man said, his voice hardening as he reached into his pocket and pulled out an object. Jens recoiled as he realized it was a gun. Whoa, wait a second. What the hell are you doing? Jens released the steering wheel and raised his hands. Get out of the car. Now. The man was now just a meter away. Almost without thinking, Jens's left hand shot out and grabbed the gun. He was almost surprised when it went off. Bloody hell! He shouted, slamming on the accelerator as the Tesla's tires spat gravel, spinning the car in a controlled arc around the Volvo. The driver had to dive out of the way to avoid being hit. What the hell was going on? Jens increased his speed, but the road was narrow, uneven, and winding. He couldn't just floor it. For some reason, a fog seemed to creep over him, a weariness that started subtly before intensifying. It was as though someone were stuffing cotton wool into his ears, right into his brain. Then he felt a pain in his armpit. He must have hit the window edge when he'd lunged for the gun. Glancing in the rearview mirror, he saw the other driver had turned his car around and was now in pursuit. Jens couldn't make sense of it. What had just happened? Why had he been attacked? And with a gun? Who the hell carried a loaded weapon around? He still felt dazed and wondered if it was shock. Then he noticed the pain in his armpit again. Undoing a button on his shirt, he slipped a hand under his arm while the road briefly straightened. His fingers came away wet, and it wasn't sweat. When he pulled his hand out, his fingertips were smeared with blood. Bloody hell, had he actually been shot? The road twisted again, with potholes forcing him to grip the wheel with both hands. The car lurched violently from side to side, and he was forced to slow down. For some reason he suddenly felt a wave of deep sorrow, and his thoughts turned to Alice again. He still couldn't understand why he kept her at arm's length, but honestly, it wasn't just her. He jerked the wheel sharply, realizing he'd almost veered into the ditch. What the hell was wrong with him? It was as if he couldn't focus, despite the insane situation he was in, despite his racing heart and the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Checking the mirror again, he saw the other car was still behind him, slowly but steadily gaining ground. He reckoned he should soon reach the farm with the tractors. Perhaps someone there could help, but then he spotted the small lake he'd passed earlier, more of a pond, really, and realized he still had a way to go before he'd be out of the woods, and the other car was getting closer. His vision began to blur, as though he had sleep in his eyes. He blinked several times, but it didn't help much. The pursuing car was almost upon him now. Jens glanced at the speedometer and was surprised to find he'd slowed to a crawl. He pressed the accelerator again. Taking a deep breath, he exhaled with a sense of all his energy draining away. His foot slipped off the pedal. A sharp pain stabbed through his chest, and as the car rolled to a stop, he began breathing in short, rapid gasps. His hands dropped from the wheel, too heavy to lift again. Another pain ripped through his chest. A fresh wave of fear washed over him as he suddenly understood what was happening. The car had stopped. When the door was wrenched open, it took every ounce of Jens Timata's remaining strength to turn his head and meet his murderer's eyes.